free to come sit up in the front rows. It might be easier for you to hear me or for me to hear you, or maybe to see some of the stuff on our projector. Welcome everyone to our weekly reading of Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Prometheus Rising presents a taxonomy of consciousness with 8 circuits and an implied evolutionary progression. We are reading it to explore ways to hack our consciousness for better living. Alright. And there are those technicalities that the people who have been here before have probably seen. How many times now? Like 10 or 12 something?
Most importantly, please keep
All
your
right.
mic muted unless questions and so on. That's it. Let me turn that off. There we go.
Thank you. Alright, I'm Bubble, also known as Ali Wurds. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, and I've worked with and written about Prometheus Rising over the past 5 years. Last week, we read Chapter 10, How to Brainwash Friends and Robotize People. If you missed it, look it up on our YouTube channel. This session will also be recorded and uploaded. Are there any questions before we start? If not, that's alright. Okay. And it looks like, how many new are you two in the back both new? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm new. It's my first time here.
Yeah, I heard you mention Robert Anton Wilson, so you probably have at least a little bit of familiarity?
Yeah. I've heard of Prometheus Rising, and I know of Robert Anton Wilson and some of his work and that within chaos magic and that.
Yeah, I've just heard about the book. It looks interesting, and I want to read it at some point. But yeah,
That's
this
cool.
is the first time I've showed up to one of these sessions where you talk about it, so I'll just sit in for a bit and see.
All right. I will say that we're on
today.
Yeah, it is a great book, but there's a lot of jargon that has been established in the earlier chapters, so it's possible that some of the stuff might not make totally clear sense if you haven't either read the first part of the book or maybe listened. But when I stop and ask for questions, if you want to ask any clarifying questions, that'd be a good time.
One more thing,
Alright.
Bubble. If you could make sure when
Go
you're not speaking, please turn off your mic, because there is a little bit of feedback when you're quiet still. Make sense? Cheers.
Yep. Alright, let's pick up with the exercises from, that would be chapter 10. So those were they started at the bottom of page 174. And a lot of these exercises were about taking on other people's reality tunnels. So like the first one said, become a pious Roman Catholic, and then explained in 3 pages why the church is still infallible and holy, despite popes like the Borgia Pope and Pius XII, an ally of Hitler. Did anyone try out any of the exercises from chapter 10?
I did, but I mean, I didn't write it down, as Vic would say. Me and my brother were talking about, we were talking about these beliefs that sort of, we believe sort of run the whole world, really, and we were trying to get into their mindset. See, from what we understand, they're all about depopulation, but we were trying to get into that headspace. Like, you'd perceive that as evil, but if you're coming from their point of view, you would say, oh, we're helping the planet. There's too many people and things like that. So we did try it, so it was interesting to sort of get into that headspace. But
yeah, it can be very valuable.
With it.
All right, did anyone else have anything they wanted to say about those exercises before we go on to the next chapter?
I didn't get a chance to try them, sadly. Being too busy. It's a shame.
Alright, let's not spend too much time on them, because a lot of them are similar to exercises we've seen in other chapters, where it's like, pick this kind of person that has a different way of seeing the world than you, and pretend to be them for a little bit, and either just like think about it or write about it, and see how it influences the way you would think about the world. Alright, so let's pick up on page 177. That's chapter 11. You see the first picture up on the screen. This chapter is called The Holistic Neurosomatic Circuit. And we have a quote here from Sri Aurobindo, and the book is The Future Evolution of Man. But there is also in us an aspiration for the mastery of nature, health, strength, duration, happiness, and ease, liberation from suffering, are part of the physical transformations which evolution is called upon to realize. And then below that you see the stereotypical Egyptian eye inside the pyramid, and the little beams of light coming off the top. And that brings us to our next image, and it says, "The resurrection of the body need not be postponed until after death. It can happen at any moment." And below that image it says, "This is a copy of Crowley's inspired drawing. For his original, see the Book of Thoth or study his tarot deck." Any questions or comments about the picture? I think we can probably just get into it. All right. So it's going to start right there talking about the image on the bottom of page 178. The beast with 4 heads represents the antique circuits. The hedonic laid-back nude is neurosomatic rapture. The serpent is the rising of the Kundalini serpent, a Hindu metaphor for imprinting this circuit 5 neurosomatic bliss control. Then we have a quote from Finnegan's Wake, which, especially for those of you who are new to Prometheus Rising, is a book where almost every word is a multilingual pun, and you're kind of intended to interpret and reinterpret it endlessly. So I'm not going to be able to pronounce it fully because it's multiple languages mashed together. So it says, calling all downs to Dane array, surrection, it is just about to roly holy over. All right. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, so let's just get on to page 179. It says, the word psychosomatic has been around long enough to be generally understood. Unfortunately, it is another semantic spook. The concept of psyche or soul was borrowed from the theologians who, being bankrupt, are in no position to lend anything. What we know and experience, our tunnel reality, is what registers on the brain and nervous system. The phenomena of faith healing, regeneration, rejuvenation, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, etc., have been occurring for many thousands of years in all known cultures. In the pre-scientific language of yesterday's psychology, we would refer to such events as psychosomatic. In our deliberately modernistic and almost sci-fi jargon, we prefer to call them neurosomatic. The neurosomatic circuit of the brain is much more recent than the antique circuits previously discussed. It does not manifest in all human beings and appears late in life, usually to those who activate and imprint it. Temporary neurosomatic consciousness can be acquired by A, the yoga practice of pranayama breathing, and B, for those who can handle it, the ingestion of cannabis drugs such as hashish and marijuana, which trigger neurotransmitters to activate this circuit. So I'm going to pause right here and just reiterate that the book is going to associate many different substances with different circuits, and that does not equate to a suggestion to consume them or anything like that. So just because they're mentioned, just make sure that you're keeping track of your own physical, emotional, mental, and legal safety with these things. All right. Continuing from there, of the former device pranayama, Aleister Crowley, certainly the most skeptical of all mystics, writes forcefully, for mind and body alike, alike. There is no purgative like pranayama. Yea, for mind and body alike, there is no purgative, for mind and body alike, no purgative like pranayama. If this is not emphatic enough, Crowley adds elsewhere, pranayama is notably useful in quieting the emotions and appetites. Digestive troubles in particular are very easy to remove in this way. It purifies both the body and the mind, and should be practiced, certainly never less than 1 hour daily by the serious student. To which he adds a footnote. Emphatically, it is impossible to combine pranayama properly performed with emotional thought. Second circuit reflexes. That comment there, second circuit reflexes, is from Raw. It should be resorted to immediately at all times during life when calm is threatened. This is very strong stuff from the mystic who filled his books with jokes and jeers and who always told his students not believe me, but don't believe me. About pranayama, for once in his life, Crowley was serious. In the experience of this author, pranayama will remove all forms of depression, including profound grief and bereavement. It will soothe anger and remove resentments. It seems beneficial to all minor health problems and occasionally major health problems. Hindus who are professionals at pranayama claim a great deal more, such as immunity to pain of all sorts, samadhi, union with God, levitation, etc. Most notably, pranayama creates neurosomatic turn-on, sensory enrichment, sensual bliss, perceptual delight, and a general laid-back hedonic high. Similar effects are produced by voluntary isolation in a lily tank, that is a sensory deprivation tank, by zero gravity. The astronaut's mystical experiences are all of this neurosomatic variety, and for the judicious or lucky, cannabis drugs as said above. Negative neurosomatic circuit effects are experienced by amateur yogis, by many potheads, and by a large number of schizophrenics. The neurosomatic feedback loop in these unfortunate cases reverses the above description. Sensory experience becomes unpleasant, any sound or touch is painful, sensuality turns into acute discomfort with the entire body. Perceptions warp into nightmare, and general anxiety is impaired. Light is particularly terrifying and painful, often associated with hell or with mind control, manipulated by unscrupulous enemies. Gopi Krishna, a Hindu bureaucrat who took up yoga originally only for health reasons, was abruptly catapulted into a negative neurosomatic state for several years. All sensations were so painful that he many times thought he would die. The details on his autobiography, Kundalini, are pathetic and sound much like schizophrenia. He came out of this finally, entered a positive neurosomatic state, and has been writing blissful books about the perfection of the all, typical of this circuit, ever since. Nikola Tesla, the Yugoslav genius, went through the same hell or schizoid state, without yoga in his teens. He came out of the horrors with the scientific theory of alternating currents, working out a belief in extrasensory perception, a superhuman memory, and a streak of visionary humanitarianism that led him into continuous conflicts with the corporations that financed his more than 100 major electrical inventions. He earned over 1 million before the age of 30, at a time when 1 million was a lot of money, and he died broke, trying to sell an invention he said would abolish poverty. Most shamans and many mystics have been through similar negative to positive neurosomatic sensitization. Christian scientists call it chemicalization. St. John of the Cross called it poetically the dark night of the soul. Kabbalists call it crossing the abyss. In Kazanzaki's The Odyssey, a modern sequel, Odysseus sees a statue which seems to him urgently meaningful. The statue was Kazanzaki's symbol for the evolution of these circuits, which have been known, more or less, in various symbolisms for a few thousand years, e.g. the 7 souls of the Egyptians, the 10 lights of the Kabbalists, etc. The Kazanzaki's statue shows an animal, circuit 1, a warrior above the animal, circuit 2, a scholar above the warrior, circuit 3, a lover, circuit 4, a face in agony, chemicalization, the dark night of the soul, the crossing of the abyss, which equals the entry to circuit 5 the hard way, a face in bliss, successful circuit 5 re-imprinting, and a man turning into pure spirit, circuit 7. Circuit 6 is missing in the schemata, as circuit 6 is missing in Jung, and everything above circuit 3 is missing in Carl Sagan. Circuit 6 is missing in the schemata, as circuit 4 is missing in Jung, and everything above circuit 3 is missing in Carl Sagan. Some lucky souls jump to circuit 5 bliss without passing through the horrors of chemicalization and the dark night of the soul. The neurosomatic circuit is polymorphous perverse, in Freud's unappetizing terminology. This merely means that the nervous system itself, taking over as driver, is now directing the rest of the body. Every act becomes an orgasm, said Aleister Crowley, giving his own tantric emphasis to the polymorphous nature of this circuit. The lives of the saints are full of stories which seem miracles to the four-circuited majority, or rejected as lies, hoaxes, yarns, by the three-circuited dogmatic rationalist, but which seem perfectly normal from the viewpoint of five-circuited polymorphous consciousness. The saint says he is in rapture. The saint says he is in rapture and full of gratitude to God for giving him such a feast for dinner as plain bread and water. Of course, many a pothead will understand that degree of neurosomatic rapture. The guru comes into the room and his bioenergy, there's a footnote there, has such a charge that cripple jumps up and is healed. The cripple merely acquired neurosomatic turn-on by contact, as some people get contact high when others are on drugs. The firewalkers in many shamanic traditions walk on fire as they tell inquiring anthropologists to prove their control over the spirit, i.e. to demonstrate to themselves and others that they have achieved high-quality neurosomatic tuning. Now that footnote next to the word bioenergy says, by which we mean nothing mystical. It is now known that many physical energies radiate from the body, and that even chemical effects can be transmitted, experienced as emotional vibes, from one person to another, the chemicals acting as stimuli to trigger neurotransmitter actions in the second person. One faith healer told the present author, most people die of adrenaline poisoning. In our terminology, most people have too much first circuit anxiety and second circuit territorial pugnacity for their own good. They are literally struggling for survival as no other animals do, despite Darwin. Most animals simply play most of the time, solve problems of survival when they have to, or die of not solving the problems. Only humans are conscious of struggling, and hence worried and depressed about the game of life. The faith healer went on. What cures them is realizing that I'm not afraid. That is, contact with a fifth circuit personality. A person who controls his or her own circuit 2 adrenaline trips can be a catalyst, throwing the sufferer upward into a personal fifth circuit experience. The avant-garde, 20% of the population due to the consciousness movement, a secularization of much ancient shamanic wisdom, already understands every wild idea in the last few pages. They have had enough neurosomatic experience to know that they were once totally robotized, as most people still are, and are knowingly engaged in requiring more neurosomatic know-how. When this reaches 51% of the population, a major historical revolution will have occurred, as profound as the life extension revolution. Another footnote. Please reread this sentence and think about it. So he's saying that when enough of the population have had a major Fifth Circuit imprint, he's claiming most people are not imprinted on the Fifth Circuit at all. Some people are able to struggle through it or via various techniques get there. When 51% of the population has had this Fifth Circuit kind of experience and imprinting, a major historical revolution will occur, as profound as the life extension revolution. The life extension revolution being the idea that technology will allow us to live longer and longer lives until eventually people start becoming immortal. Alright, in McLuhan's terms, the Fifth Circuit is non-linear and global. That is, not limited by the one thing at a time sequences of the semantic circuit. It thinks in gestalts. This is why it is so often connected with intuition, which is a way of thinking between and around data points on the perceptual screen, sensing what total field the points must be part of. The great musician has developed a remarkable feedback between Fifth Circuit gestalting and the Third Circuit function of coding such coherent structures into the inspired symbolism of music. Music always leads into some right brain activity in listeners, and the Fifth Circuit is almost certainly located in the right brain hemisphere. Beethoven, we remember, was left-handed. Since the left hand is neurologically linked to the polymorphous right brain, one might say he was genetically inclined to right brain activities, that is, to sensing coherent wholes, to plunging into neurosomatic bliss almost at will, and to sensory sensual raptness and rapture. Everybody knows that the Sixth Symphony is pantheistic, but whether Beethoven was an ideological pantheist or not, that way of responding to nature is normal and natural right brain circuit 5 functioning. That is, anybody on the Fifth Circuit will talk like a pantheist, whether or not he has developed a philosophy about pantheism. The miracle of Beethoven is not that he felt the universe that way. A few thousand Fifth Circuit types throughout history have also felt and sensed nature that way, but that he mastered the Third Circuit art of music with such skill that he could communicate such experiences, which is precisely what the ordinary mystic cannot do. The neurosomatic circuit probably began to appear around 30,000 years ago. That is the conclusion of Barbara Honegger, who has made a profound study of European cave paintings, coming to the conclusion that many of them show exercises to increase right brain activity similar to those still used in surviving shamanic and yogic traditions. This Fifth Circuit is bonded into the right cortex and neurologically linked to the limbic first system and the genitalia. These neural links explain the sexual metaphor of kundalini or serpent energy used to describe the circuit in systems as varied as Indian Tantra, Gnosticism, and Voodoo, and the Chinese yin-yang male-female energies associated with it. Prolonged sexual play without orgasm always triggers some Circuit 5 consciousness. It is quite easy to determine if the Fifth Circuit has been activated successfully or not. How does a person go to a doctor? If a mind researcher is glowing rather than grayish, bouncy rather than craggy, if he or she has a sparkle, and if he or she virtually never goes to a doctor, the neurosomatic circuit has been mastered. As Mary Baker Eddy once wrote, thereby making herself hugely unpopular with those who love to talk of matters mystical but have no empirical knowledge, the Word was made flesh. The divine truth must be known by its effect on the body as well as the mind. There is no known tribe to anthropology which doesn't have at least one neurosomatic technician, shaman. Large-scale outbursts of neurosomatic consciousness have occurred frequently in all major historical periods, usually being stamped out quickly by the local branch of the Inquisition or the AMA. Other outbursts have been co-opted and diluted. As we read in the New Testament, "And when he had called into him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. And as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give." It may or may not have happened exactly like that, as Mark Twain would say. There might be a few stretchers in there, but something like this, however much the evangelist might exaggerate it, must have happened to account for Christianity's rapid triumph over other, but probably less effective, systems of opening the Fifth Circuit. Mithraism, the Eleusinian cult at Athens, the Dionysian cults, etc., all had age-old shamanic techniques for inducing neurosomatic rapture. Christianity, at first, seems to have been superior in creating neurosomatic control. In St. Paul's metaphor, the old Adam, circuits 1 through 4, got bleached out, and the new Adam, circuit 5, took over as the center of consciousness and self-government. In another metaphor, the body became the flexible clay, and the awakened, illuminated brain became the sculptor.
Bubble, I think this
Let's
might be...
there.
yeah, exactly. This is what I wanted to ask. Awesome. Go. Recap time.
Yeah, I was just going to say let's pause there. It's a recap time. Okay, so let's go back over. There was a lot of stuff. And then after, I'm just going to skim over and pick out key points that I'm seeing. And then you all have a chance to ask questions or make comments. All right, so we got through the first paragraph on page 185. And this chapter starts on 177. So we opened up with that quote that let's go back to for a second, that if we think about it a little bit more in retrospect, it sounds like there's an aspiration for the mastery of nature, health, strength, duration, happiness, and ease, liberation from suffering. So it sounds a little bit like an ideally imprinted Fifth Circuit. And they're part of the physical transformation with which evolution is called upon to realize. So that's alluding to the fact that Robert Anton Wilson and perhaps other people are implying that if you master this Fifth Circuit through techniques like yoga or tantra or whatever else. It's not just mental or emotional, it has a physical impact. There is a mind-body connection, and that he's claiming, if you remember that quote he said for us to go back and read and think about again, like 51% of people having a neurosomatic experience. Robert Anton Wilson, as I interpret this book, is under the impression that once enough of the population has a Fifth Circuit experience, humanity is going to become, in a certain sense, a new kind of organism, in the same way that we are not the same as cavemen. And once enough of humanity has, and culture, I should say, has embodied the Fifth Circuit and it becomes normal, so to speak, eventually the same thing might start to happen with later circuits. So it's interesting to think about and project into. Let's get back into the text. Then there was that picture from the Thoth deck. And it's just, I guess we'll look at it again real quick. So it's talking about how this four-headed beast in Ra's interpretation, each of the four heads of the lower four circuits. You see that serpent with the glowing head behind the Scarlet Woman? He's saying that that is like Kundalini energy, and that by using these techniques, you can raise up to the Fifth Circuit. And if you look where she's holding up an indentation with a dot in it, presumably it's like a chalice type of symbol based on other depictions of Babylon. You can see it's kind of opening up the gates of heaven. I'm interpreting a little bit there. All right, let's go on. Oh. All right, so he starts out by talking about the word psychosomatic, which is like the connection between the psyche and the body, and that there are like psychosomatic illnesses. A lot of those are treated very well with various spiritual techniques, because if the root cause of your physical problem has to do with, like, say, anxiety, like maybe you're so tense that you're holding your body tight all the time, ideally you resolve that on a psychological level and you stop being tense. And there are a lot of things with, like, digestion, he mentions. Your organs are physical things. All right. So he talks about, like, faith healing and rejuvenation. A lot of those things can be done to a certain extent via this bliss circuit, which he's calling neurosomatic rather than psychosomatic, because he's trying to move from the idea of psyche to the idea of neurology. And he's saying temporary neurosomatic consciousness can be acquired by yoga, specifically pranayama, and he's claiming that cannabis does this or can do this in some cases. And again, you don't actually need it. Notice the first thing he lists is yoga. Crowley is very emphatic about pranayama, like yogic breathing practices. It talks a little bit about negative neurosomatic circuit effects, claiming that they're experienced by amateur yogis, many potheads, and a large number of schizophrenics. So sensory experience becomes unpleasant, any sound or touch is painful, pretty much everything becomes acute discomfort, perceptions warp into nightmare, generalized anxiety. All right. He mentions Gopi Krishna and Nikola Tesla, who he's claiming both had Fifth Circuit experiences that led to dramatic changes in their personality. He mentions a little bit of the dark night of the soul, and Christian scientists call it chemicalization. And he's claiming that that is a negative to positive neurosomatic sensitization. So you start out with a very negative Fifth Circuit experience, you're able to re-imprint it into a more positive one. I think that's the gist of it. Let me keep going. Yeah, but now we're back at that quote about how when this reaches 51% of the population, a major historical revolution will have occurred as profound as the life extension revolution. And he talks about gestalts, how this Fifth Circuit experiencing is not linear like the Third Circuit. It's multiple things going on at once together. talking about Beethoven and musicians in general. He's claiming that Beethoven in particular had such a mastery of the third circuit as applied to composition that he was able to create a work of art, the Sixth Symphony, that induces a fifth circuit experience, I guess, to people who are ready and familiar enough with classical music to hear it that way. And he claims that this circuit began to appear in humanity around 30,000 years ago. And that takes us right about to where we are. We were just talking about how at least early Christianity, there's that quote from Matthew that I believe Ra is interpreting as saying that Jesus was able to transmit a fifth circuit experience to his disciples, who were then able to perform various forms of healing via this circuit. So that's a lot of stuff. Are there any questions or comments about any of that?
Yeah, is there sort of like a summary or like sort of run-down version of like a summary of what the circuit, like what is he talking about? Like,
In that, unless something goes awful, that is a very physical, somatic, physical experience where pretty much every sensation becomes blissful, becomes pleasurable. Unfortunately, MDMA is like very toxic at pretty much any dose, as far as I understand. But yeah, ideally you use something like pranayama to learn to cultivate that kind of experience, to where like, wow, this chair just feels really nice. Everything becomes intensely wonderful.
Yeah, I could
on a physical
maybe
level.
make a couple comments about that. Oh,
Go ahead.
1 second. Could you please take a seat, Zoe? I guess not. They played around with the slides a little bit. Could you go back to the right slide, Bubble? Anyway, the comment I was going to make, you know, the Dark Night of the Soul supposedly has something to do with this Fifth Circuit, right? Well, in my experience, I had some of these moments where after a very dark time came, you know, this cliche kind of phoenix moment, you know, rising from the ashes. And, well, things fade and change, of course, but for a relatively significant amount of times, you know, there was a sense of, you know, everything having meaning, you know, this total clarity, and I think that was very pleasant to experience. It might be also a little bit what Robert Anton Wilson is talking about, you know, with the experiences that Tesla and the other person had. You know, something pretty intense goes down and it turns into a transformative thing that leads to, you know, something good. Other thing I wanted to mention is that we had a couple discussions about breath work in general. There's videos in the Discord. There's also a book in the library here called Breath that goes into all sorts of things to do with breathing exercises, meditation, but also, you know, the kind of stuff that Ra is talking about here, and how it can absolutely, you know, science is figuring out it can absolutely impact health very drastically. Just breathing in certain rhythms, patterns, and so on. Super interesting for anybody here to check that out, because it's super easy to do as well, right? Like you just gotta figure out how to breathe and do it. Anybody can do that. So yeah, super interesting stuff.
Would it be fair to say that, like, I mean, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, would it be like a Fifth Circuit sort of level of consciousness would be having enough awareness to sort of hack your body to induce these states, or
I think it might
you know,
have
like
to
as
do
you were
with
saying,
perspective, and this. I think this perspective. I at least if I had a guess at it, right? Bubble might know better than I do, but it's something to do with, I guess, a perspective gained or out of a certain kind of experience. You know, like maybe a moment of rapture,
or
almost.
like a revelation.
Yeah, like a revelation of some sorts, and you know, this might be simulated a bit with MDMA or something like that, but living it, you know, is truly seeing the good in all things, for example, or feeling really connected maybe to the things that are happening around you and the people around you. I don't know, Bubble, what do you think? Am I making sense here or not?
Yeah, I guess the distinction I want to make is more that so like that experience of rapture would be a very powerful Fifth Circuit experience, and so long as you stay in that state of bliss, it can honestly it can be kind of annoying to other people that aren't on the same wavelength as you. That is like acting from within the Fifth Circuit. Um,
And it's also not
but if
guaranteed
you
that you
like,
stay on that wavelength for very long. I mean, there's no guarantee to that, at least in my experience.
yeah, you probably don't want to stay. In my opinion, you don't really want to stay on any one circuit all of the time, and that a lot of wisdom, a lot of like meta level wisdom is about knowing what circuit does it make the most sense to be on right now, or what combination of circuits, thinking non-linearly. And then there's we could say, magical skill to activate or deactivate those circuits. So those are two separate things, and you may or may not be great at them, but like ideally you can identify, okay, right now I really would be better off in my third circuit. So like if I were having a bliss state experience right now, I might be like raving about Prometheus Rising, but I wouldn't really be explaining it very well.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. A couple chapters back, there was this diagram, right, with uh, the compass where you kind of want to be able to navigate across these different circuits and so on, and the states that are associated with them.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll just keep going.
I've got one.
All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. Firstly, my battery's going low, so if I disappear, I do apologise. The second one is about the circuits. Could you say when you're talking about the circuits and the feelings of bliss, can they be attributed to, like, say, the Kabbalah and the Sephiroth in the Kabbalah, the different worlds?
I have seen different attributions between the circuits and the different spheres. I'm not. I used to read a fair amount of Kabbalah. It's not like my main system I work with, but like for instance, in my mind, I associate the third circuit with the eighth sphere. Like that just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
If anything, probably 6 or 7 would be 5, but like it's a different number of items.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think last week we also touched on how people mapped it out to chakra system and other systems. It's an exercise that some Robert Anton Wilson readers certainly do.
I was going to say, I know that traditionally there's like 7 chakras, but he's talking about 8 circuits here. So, is there any example of there being?
There's actually hundreds of chakra systems. The popular one these days is 7, but yeah, there's so many ways to go, and it's never gonna fit exactly right because every model's different, I guess. But yeah, it's still interesting to do the mental exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other things before we get started again? All right, let's get back to it. All right, so we had just read that first paragraph at the top of page 185. And then below that it says, in general, Fourth Circuit problems take the form of guilt. I cannot do what I am supposed to do. Third Circuit problems take the form of perplexity. I cannot understand how I got into this mess, or how to get out of it, or what is expected of me. Second Circuit problems take the form of bullying or cowardice. I will force them, or I will surrender and let them force me. First Circuit problems take the form of body symptoms. I feel rotten all over, gradually centering in, under enough stress, on one acute disabling symptom. And then there's a footnote. This is Eric Burns' wooden leg game, which asks to be relieved of social participation or interaction on the grounds of being physically or to combat. Alright, I haven't heard of that game, but let's jump back. Fifth Circuit neurosomatic consciousness bleaches out all these problems at once. The disappearance of First Circuit physical illnesses only seems more miraculous than the transcendence of Second Circuit emotionalism. third circuit perplexity and fourth circuit guilt. It is the Cartesian mind-body dualism that makes us think of such first circuit physical cures as somehow stranger or more spooky than any rapid improvement on the other circuits. One of the intents of our terminology is precisely to transcend that Cartesian dualism, making all the circuits equally comprehensible within one circuit. The robotized rationalist fears and resents Circuit 5 rapture and its holistic intuitive faculties, just as the robotized emotionalist fears and resents Circuit 3 reason. Thus, when the neurosomatic circuit feedback begins to function, and the mutated Circuit 5 person tries to describe his or her rapture and at-oneness, the rationalist hastily mutters that this is merely subjective. Misery is merely subjective too, but that doesn't keep it from hurting. The neurosomatic skill of transmuting all experience so that one is high and happy in a situation where the four-circuited majority would be miserable is worth learning for the very simple egotistic reason that it's more fun to be happy than to be in agony. It is also socially beneficial because, as Tim Leary often said, you can't do good until you feel good. Just as misery loves company, the high and happy want everybody else to be high and happy. This first lesson the Fifth Circuit adept has to learn is to control this upsurge of altruism and not make a nuisance of oneself by trying to force everybody to be happy. The rationalist is even more alarmed by the results of prolonged Fifth Circuit bliss, which includes the ability to heal a wide variety of diseases, both in oneself and in others. Even the well-documented current research on endorphins, which gives us the beginning of a neurochemical explanation of how such healings operate, is regarded with discomfort or hostility by the more robotized rationalists. It all sounds metaphysical and therefore cannot exist. Alright, we have a footnote there. It says, endorphins are neurotransmitters that trigger Circuit 5. They can be activated by cannabis drugs, psychedelics, meditation, pranayama, or visualization of white light. The last is the most common system used by faith healers and was known by the medieval Rosicrucians. Back to the main text. There's nothing supernatural about the Fifth Circuit. It merely appears supernatural by comparison to the earlier circuits, but the Third Circuit, of which the rationalist is so proud, and undoubtedly appeared supernatural when it first appeared. The Egyptians attributed speech and writing, Third Circuit functions, to divine intervention and by the god Thoth. The Fifth Circuit, like the earlier circuits, is just another evolutionary mutation necessary to us as we move towards a more complex neurosocial level. It is just like ordinary life, except that you're always a foot above the ground, says an old Zen proverb. This floating aspect of the Fifth Circuit is preparing us for extraterrestrial migration. One of the most interesting neurosomatic adepts in all history, from the viewpoint of the present theory, was Mary Baker Eddy. Precisely because Mrs. Eddy was fundamentally naive and unaware of most philosophy, she never realized that you cannot speak or write about the ineffable. She therefore wrote about it at length. If her writings are hard to decipher, if they often sound like ravings of a disordered mind, Aleister Crowley's description of mystic writings, including his own, they also have moments of astonishing lucidity. For instance, she knew and wrote with total clarity, the illness is fear and love is its cure. Most psychologists are just beginning to comprehend that today, over 100 years later. The perfect love casteth out fear, and that is how neurosomatic awakening cures disease. As Mrs. Eddy told one inquirer, love, love, love. That's all you have to know to be a healer. 60 years later, unheeded by most of his profession, a Scottish psychiatrist, Ian Suddy, wrote that the physician's love heals the patient. Another quote from Mrs. Eddy is appropriate at this point. When understanding changes, we shall gain the reality of life, the control of soul over sense. This must be the climax, before harmonious and immortal man is obtained and his capabilities revealed. To the ordinary scientifically educated reader, this is metaphysical gibberish. Let us try to retranslate it into our own neurological metaphors. When the brain develops its full potentials, we shall gain a new view of life and the control of neurosomatic bliss. over lower circuit guilts, perplexities, emotions, and body symptoms. This is evolutionarily scheduled to occur before Sixth Circuit evolutionary awareness and physical immortality are achieved. We suggest that Mrs. Eddy, having activated a large part of the right brain hemisphere, was able to think in gestalts as well as serving as transmitter of neurosomatic healing to others. She was looking down the DNA highway to the scientific breakthroughs of the decade in which we now live. Many have turned on the neurosomatic circuit due to prolonged illness, especially if they grow impatient with doctors and resort to self-medication and or faith healing. The bathroom of Nietzsche, according to Stefan Zweig, looked like a pharmacy shop due to the large number of drugs and medicines with which the philosopher treated his chronic migraines. Gurdjieff employed cocaine, hashish, and yoga techniques, probably including pranayama, to treat the incessant and increasing pains resultant from his war wounds and 2 car accidents. The harshness of these two philosophers, their contempt for ordinary human suffering, their visions of the superhuman state beyond emotion and pain, all probably derived from neurosomatic turn-ons alternating with acute pain. That is, they experienced the whole of evolution from the lower circuits to the full development of neurosomatic bliss, and were chiefly expressing contempt for their own relapses into less than blissful consciousness. In the East, the control of the neurosomatic circuit is known as dhyana, chan, or zen. The state is sometimes called Buddha mind or Buddha body. To the ancient Greeks, where rituals to achieve it with psychedelic drugs were performed yearly at Eleusis, those who accomplished the ritual successfully were called daigens, twice born. The metaphor lingers in the born-again terminology of charismatic Christianity and is symbolized by the myth of the resurrection of the body. Freud recognized this state vaguely as the oceanic experience. Gurdjieff calls this circuit the magnetic center. Faith healers and adepts of a few yogic schools seem to live in neurosomatic consciousness permanently. Most who have achieved it all tend to have it only in flashes, as noted by Ezra Pound. The paradis n'est pas artificiel, but is jagged, for a flash, for an hour, then agony, then an hour. This paradis, this condition of neurosomatic mind-body peace, should be considered a new brain circuit toward which all humanity is evolving, slowly and painfully out of a million antique circuits. This progression from primate emotion to post-hominid tranquility, from man to superman, is the next step that mystics forever talk of. You can hear it in most of Beethoven's later major compositions. As mentioned before, governmental brainwashers are generally too puritanical to handle or manhandle the socio-sexual circuit and content themselves with mind-washing and brain programming on the biosurvival, emotional, and semantic circuits, while outlaw bands like the SLA or Mansonoids go further and re-imprint their socio-sexual circuit also. It is necessary to note that some cults presently active on this backward planet go even farther than that and engage in neurosomatic brainwashing. A permanent neurosomatic circuit can only be imprinted by prolonged practice of one of the yogic, tantric, or related sciences, and perhaps good genes, good environments, and generally good luck. Neurosomatic brainwashing, the most powerful form of robotization, consists in temporary activization of the neurosomatic circuit by the brainwasher, together with assurances that only the brainwasher or the god who acts through him can turn on this circuit. For full effect, this is of course preceded by normal brainwashing. The victim is first isolated from his or her previous environment and trained to hook the biosurvival circuit onto the guru and or the ashram or commune. The emotional circuit is bent and broken by continuous attacks upon status, ego, until the only emotional security left is found in total submission to the group reality island. The re-infantilized victim is then ready to imprint any semantic circuitry desired, from EST to Krishna to People's Temple. The socio-sexual circuit can then easily be programmed for celibacy, for free love, or for whatever sexual game the guru has selected. Then, and only then, the neurosomatic buttons are pushed and ecstasy is given to the subject by the guru. Marjo Gortner, a longtime practitioner of this science, commented ironically in a film made after abandoning it for a different career. The marks never realized they could do it, push the neurosomatic buttons, for themselves. They all think they needed me jacking them off. Gortner is nowadays unusually honest. The average charismatic insists that the victims can never learn to do it for themselves. One of the greatest historical practitioners of this neuroscience was Hassan Isaba, who used relatively simple techniques, including, evidently, a time-release capsule invented by the Sufi College of Wisdom in Cairo. As I describe Hassan's technique, based on historical records, in my novel The Trick Top Hat, 2 young candidates dine with Hassan. The food is laced with a time-release capsule. When asleep, the candidates are taken to Hassan's famous Garden of Delights. The capsule had a heavy release of opium, and they were quite thoroughly unconscious and unaware of their surroundings. The garden of officially known as the Garden of Delights covered several acres. Here, candidates were prepared for admission to the Order of the Assassins. They were to become the most feared and legendary professional killers in history. But here also, in this same garden, were prepared candidates for admission to the Brotherhood of Light, the Illuminati. The candidates, in fact, were prepared the same way. They themselves selected, unknown to themselves, which order they would enter, the political assassins or the mystic Illuminati. Both young men were conveyed into the Garden of Delights and placed several acres apart from each other. In short time, the second stage of the time-release capsule began to work. Cocaine was released into their bloodstreams, thereby overwhelming the traces of the soporific opium and causing them to awaken full of energy and zest. At the same time as they woke, hashish also began to be released, so they saw everything with exceptional clarity, and all colors were jewel-like, brilliant, divinely beautiful. A group of extremely comely and busty young ladies, imported from the most expensive brothel in Cairo, sat in a circle around each of the young candidates, playing flutes and other delicately sweet musical instruments. "Welcome to heaven," they sang, as the awakening men gazed about them in wonder. "By the magic of the holy Lord Hassan, you have entered paradise while still alive." And they fed them paradise apples, oranges, far sweeter and stranger than the earth apples they had known before, and they showed them the animals of paradise, imported from as far away as Japan in some cases. Creatures far more remarkable than those ordinarily seen in Afghanistan. "This is heaven," the first young man exclaimed in ecstasy. "Great is Allah, and great is the wise Lord Hassan Saba." But 20 acres away, surrounded by similar lovely ladies and other wonders, the second young man merely gazed about him, smiled in contentment, and said nothing. And then, in both cases, the hour of paradise, as promised in the Quran, began to dance. The Urus, I'm not sure what the word is, of paradise, as promised in the Quran, began to dance. And as they danced, they discarded one by one each of their 7 veils. As the veils were thrown off, more and more hashish was released from the capsules, and the young man saw with greater clarity, felt with deeper intensity, experienced beauty and sexual joy in a way completely unknown to their previous earth lives. Then, as each young man sat entranced by the beauty and wonder of heaven, the Uri finished the dance, and nude and splendid as they were, rushed forward in a bunch like flowers cast before the wind. And some fell at the candidate's feet and kissed his ankles, some kissed knees or thighs, one sucked raptly at his penis, others kissed the chest and arms and belly, a few kissed eyes and mouth and ears, and as he was smothered in this hashish-intensified avalanche of love, the lady working on his penis sucked, and he climaxed in her mouth as softly and slowly and blissfully as a single snowflake falling. In a little while, there was no more hashish being released, and more opium began to flow into the bloodstream. The young candidates slept again. And in their torpor, they were removed from the Garden of Delights and returned to the banquet hall of the Lord Hassan. There they awoke. "Truly," the first exclaimed, "I have seen the glories of heaven as foretold in Al-Quran. I have no more doubts. I will trust Hassan Isaba and love him and serve him." "You are accepted for the Order of Assassins," said Hassan solemnly. "Go at once to the green room to meet your superior in the order." When this candidate had left, Hassan turned to the second, asking, "And you?" "I have discovered the first matter, the medicine of metals, the elixir of life, the stone of philosophers, true wisdom and perfect happiness," said he, quoting the alchemical formula. "And it's inside my own head." Hassan Isaba grinned broadly. "Welcome to the Order of the Illuminati," he said, laughing. Hassan Isaba was not the first or last student of the ways in which sexuality can be transmuted into Fifth Circuit rapture. Further to the east, there were tantric schools within Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which taught techniques by which prolongation of the genital embrace could explode into dramatic brain change. In the West, underground cults of Gnostics, Illuminati, alchemists, and witches kept similar techniques as closely guarded secrets. For if the Holy Inquisition ever learned of such practices, the participants would be denounced as devil worshippers and burned at the stake. In our own time, there has been a revolutionary upsurge of these ancient neurological secrets, with an admixture of more modern techniques. Tantric teachers are available in many cities. Masters and Johnson use quasi-tantric practices to treat sexual dysfunction. As early as 1968, a poll by McLaughlin showed that 85% of pot smokers in the country said their chief interest in weed was its function as enhancer of erotic sensation. Vibrators and other sexual toys proliferate. Gays come out of the closet. Philosophers of a culture without repression, Norman Brown, Henri Marcuse, and Charles Reich, became bestsellers. Saul Kent, a writer on medical science for general audiences, has even suggested that electronic sexual surrogates can and will be manufactured in the near future. Your own Marilyn Monroe doll. Instead of joining Tom Wolfe and the Neo-Puritans in throwing up our hands in horror at such an idea, let us consider it for a moment. Let us see if we can peek outside our imprinted, conditioned reality tunnel. If a sexual android is possible in 2005 or 2050 or whenever, why not a totally programmed sexual environment? Let us call this, in memory of Hermann Hesse, the Magic Theater. We start with what is concurrently available in high-priced brothels in hedonic Sunbelt section of America. Massage, a First Circuit tranquilizer, has all the advantages of the opiates without being habit-forming. Our Magic Theater, then, would include computerized body relaxers and energizers better than current techniques. Porn movies are available for stimulation in the better brothels. Our Magic Theater would have them in 3D on all four walls, obviously. Marijuana and stimulants like cocaine or speed are available in brothels everywhere. Our Magic Theater would have better chemical rapture agents. One can go on adding details according to personal fantasy until one has created a room in which bliss can be extended in all dimensions indefinitely. A strange thing has happened in constructing the cyberneticized brothel. We have gone beyond sex to something that might be called metasex. While specific genital pleasure might still be fun, it is hardly as important as it seemed to us before we came into the multidimensional pleasure dome, where all senses are stimulated to ecstasy. And the most peculiar thing about this body science fiction projection is that we don't even need to build a magic room. It is built into our brains already. We have been describing the positive neurosomatic consciousness, which Freud called polymorphous perversity in one of his Puritan moods, and the oceanic experience in one of his mystical moments. This is what the neurosomatically turned-on brain feels like. In alchemy, this was known as the multiplication of the first matter, or the philosopher's gold, which was unlike ordinary gold in that it could not be spent or used up, since it perpetually multiplied and renewed itself. It is the third eye of the Illuminati tradition, which transforms all it sees, the eye of which Jesus speaks in gnomic aphorism. Then we have a quote from Matthew 6:22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body will be full of lights. Alright, that is the end of the chapter except for the exercises. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, the Pleasuredome
If
stuff
not,
is
we can do a
interesting
recap.
in context of VR, right? I mean, I appreciate what Raw is trying to tell us with that stuff, but obviously it can definitely go two ways, you know, when we create Pleasuredomes for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If you manage to create something like that, I mean, it would be just as addicting as any other bliss-inducing drug. Possibly more if it doesn't have immediately obvious physical side effects. I can't help but imagine that something like that would be draining on you.
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
least on a physical level. Yeah.
Was he trying to say basically that all of that stuff, we don't need that external stimulus because it's already embedded in our neurological system? Or, I mean, he was saying that
Yeah.
all this is already in us.
Yeah, exactly. There are a lot of traditions around the world where you visualize some sort of environment or things inside of yourself or energies or whatever that you sort of imprint into inducing a bliss state experience that can be, to paraphrase him, extended indefinitely in all dimensions. And that is part of what he was talking about in the fourth circuit with re-imprinting your sexuality. Um, if you wanted to do that for mystical purposes, you would want to be re-imprinting it in a way that allows you to, in a healthy and in controlled manner, extend it indefinitely to create this sort of pantheistic Fifth Circuit experience. In my opinion, I'm sure there are people that disagree or agree in various ways. But you don't have to physically build it. No,
Yeah, I'm not sure what to
you
think
just
about that. I'm sure there's people that have meditated towards that, but this is sort of like the first time hearing of it. I have heard that our bodies, I think it's our brains or our bodies, they already have cannabinoid receptors in them built into the system. So, like, our bodies should be able to produce, uh, similar to, like, ingesting cannabis, but our bodies can produce the same sort of stuff because it has
yeah,
receptors in it
exactly.
for that.
Any drug that you take can only act on receptors that are already in your head. I would suggest, well, I don't really want to generalize, but like if you take something, so what I was going to initially say, and maybe this is false, I'm not like a pharmacologist or anything, was that a lot of times if you induce an external substance, it does activate one particular or maybe a group of related receptors much more strongly. It's sort of like a more narrow activation, but I don't think that's true for all compounds, so I wouldn't want to like generalize. But um, inducing it artificially is different than inducing it just through like internal practice. But you can definitely
Yeah,
activate those same receptors.
I can definitely, the experience I was just retelling earlier. The perspective change happens, and you have this certain bliss state, regardless of what you're experiencing. That seems a rewarding trick to learn to do, on your own accord, for sure. There's actually a question from the stream bubble. Somebody is asking clarification about the story of the Hashishin. Um, he's asking when was the experiment done? Of course, it's more like a historical dramatization, maybe, but could you explain or recap what exactly that story was?
Yeah, so the story is that Hassan Asaba had a sort of like private plot of land that he decked out to be similar to heaven, according to the Quran,
When was this
and
again?
that he had I don't know an exact date. I
It's like
could
medieval
Google it real
times, right?
quick if people wanted me to. Um, my brain is telling me 13 to 1400s, but I really don't know. It was probably before the 1400s. I'm not like a historian or anything,
No, that's all right.
so I
It's a
can't
rough
really
ballpark.
comment on that. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it was 1300s, but like I could be totally wrong. But he was able to create time release capsules supposedly of different compounds that activate different circuits in different ways. With the longest lasting being an opioid, so that you could knock someone out, wake them back up with a stimulant. He suggested cocaine because it's short acting. And then at the same time as the cocaine activates, you would activate the hashish, which he is with Robert Anton Wilson associates with the Fifth Circuit. And then there would be prostitutes there, ideally at the same time, to, I guess you could say, tempt the person based on the way Robert Anton Wilson is telling the
I
story.
guess
But
it was
then
like a
by the time the
simulation or
cocaine,
something, right?
yeah, it was it was like a simulation of heaven. It's sort of like that pleasure dome he talks about later. And then once the cocaine wears off, the opium is still going strong because it lasts half-life is like 24 hours. It's a long time. So you would pass back out again, and then he would move you away to some other location, and you wouldn't realize that you had not actually been to heaven, supposedly.
Yeah, so I
that
guess
was an effective.
yeah, like a recruitment strategy or something along those lines. Like again, I don't know the historicity of this, but I think that's at least what Ra was trying to say. It was some kind of a trickery to recruit people into loyalty, right?
Yeah, it was a
them.
way to like re-imprint all their circuits from bottom up, with opioids being like first circuit, and maybe imprint them on you as the person who gives them the fifth circuit bliss.
Right on. Yeah. Cheers.
All right. Any other questions or comments before we get to the exercises?
Well,
All
is
right.
there time for like a short
ahead.
recap of the second half? I know there's a lot, and I'm not sure how you are on time, but
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
sure. Awesome.
All right. Last time we recapped was at the top of page 185. All right. So I like this paragraph a lot. It says right here, fourth circuit problems take the form of guilt in general. Third circuit take the form of perplexity, like understanding how to do something. Second circuit's problems take the form of bullying or cowardice, and that first circuit problems take the form of body symptoms, like I feel rotten all over. And he says after that the fifth circuit, neurosomatic consciousness bleaches out all of these problems at once.
Sorry,
so you'll
one
notice
second,
that
Bubble.
in a lot of cases.
Guys, please keep your mics muted. I think that's you, Seb. You're very welcome to join. I'm glad you're here, but please mute your mic while you're in the audience. Thanks. Sorry, Bubble. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, so a lot of times I think you'll find that each circuit has a way of overpowering or recontextualizing all of the circuits that come before it. And again, he talks about how that as culture, humanity, whatever, becomes increasingly imprinted or increasingly integrates these different circuits into its structure as like a group entity, humanity gradually becomes something else. Like we are no longer the same thing as cavemen. We're pretty different from how we were in the Middle Ages in some respects, not necessarily physically, but in terms of the way we think about things and the things we do, the things that are. I don't want to ramble too long about that. But going on from there, so the robotized rationalist fears and resents Circuit 5 rapture, just as the robotized emotionalist fears and resents the third circuit reason. Thus, when the neurosomatic feedback begins to function, the fifth circuit person tries to describe their experience, and to the rationalist, it's merely subjective. It's pretty hard to communicate one circuit to another one. Normally, there was a diagram on a different chapter where you want to try to communicate on the same level as someone else if you can, unless you're able to move them to a different circuit through whatever strategy. It talks about how misery is merely subjective, but it's still an experience. It still hurts. So the neurosomatic skill of transmuting all experience so that one is high and happy in a situation where the fourth circuited majority would be miserable is worth learning, at least just because it's better to be happy. It's more fun to be happy anyways. All right. He talks a little bit how some conditions, some medical conditions, can seemingly be cured or healed via Fifth Circuit experiences, because some conditions are, to use an older term, psychosomatic, or Ra prefers neurosomatic, because there is a relationship between your consciousness and your body. Like if only there are hormone releases from different emotions. Other people today talk a lot about like activating the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system as being some of the stuff that yoga does. I'm not personally an expert on that, but that's more of a neurological take on how the Fifth Circuit can maybe harm or heal. And it's a lot of that for like the next page or so, talking about Mrs. Eddy and how she wrote about how love is all you have to know to be a healer. He keeps mentioning gestalts in this chapter. Gestalts are like, and I'm not an expert on this, they're non-linear. So instead of having things going one after the other, you have multiple clusters of stuff that are activating at the same time. And it talks about how Gurdjieff and Nietzsche both experienced large amounts of physical pain and used various medications or techniques to treat, or at least treat the symptoms of those, so that they kind of bounced back and forth a lot between Fifth Circuit agony and Fifth Circuit, or maybe First Circuit, like physical pain, and Fifth Circuit bliss. And that maybe influenced the harshness of those two philosophers and their contempt for ordinary human suffering, their visions of the superhuman states beyond emotion and pain, all probably derived from neurosomatic turn-ons alternating with acute pain, he says on page 188. And he mentions how for most people, Fifth Circuit turn-ons don't necessarily last very long. Maybe if you spend like your whole life working on yoga and that's what you do like every day, all the time, you might tend to stay there. But for most people, it, to paraphrase Ezra Pound, for a flash for an hour, then agony, then an hour. So it kind of flashes on and then back off again. And he says, Robert Anton Wilson says, this condition of neurosomatic peace should be considered a new brain circuit toward which all humanity is evolving slowly and painfully out of mammalian antique circuits. So Robert Anton Wilson believes that these circuits are a model for future evolution as well as past evolution. And that once enough of the population has these Fifth Circuit experiences and they become more normalized, that it will dramatically change global culture. And he says here, a permanent neurosomatic circuit can only be imprinted by prolonged practice of one of the yogic, tantric, or related sciences, or perhaps good genes, good environments, and good luck. So if you want to re-imprint this circuit, you need to find something that is not harmful to you, that you can do like every day for an hour. Crowley suggested, I think it was Crowley earlier in the chapter, suggested that you would want to be doing pranayama for an hour a day if you were serious about it. And then getting back to how this relates to brainwashing, and like charismatic healers, and a little bit about Hassan Asaba, was that, let me find the exact line again. Neurosomatic brainwashing, the most powerful form of robotization, consists in temporary activation of the neurosomatic circuit by the brainwasher, together with assurances that only the brainwasher or God who acts through him can turn on this circuit. So you'll find that in a lot of places around the world where people are manipulating each other with spiritual techniques, is there'll be one person who uses whatever techniques to activate a bliss state or maybe some other sort of states that is desirable. And then there is the insistence that the only way you can do it is either through the group or especially through the leader of that group. Yeah, and if that is consistent and long enough, go ahead.
Quick suggestion again to throw out there is the series Wild Wild Country, I think it is, on Netflix, about Osho and his whole thing. It's crazy to see what this can result in. Highly recommend checking that out for anybody that's interested. Wild Country.
Yeah, that is a good documentary. In that documentary, I don't remember, especially okay, I'm not gonna ramble about it, never mind. But you can definitely see that in different groups around the world. All right. All right, and that takes us back to Hassan Asaba and that story of the Garden of Delights that we already discussed again. And kind of the moral of that story, as I'm interpreting it, is that there are at least two different ways to interpret this sort of Fifth Circuit turn-on experience. You can sort of become enraptured and entrapped by that sort of experience and perhaps compulsively seek it out. The implication is that if you were accepted into the Order of the Assassins in this story, it's because that you became enraptured with the experience and you would do anything, even become an assassin, in order to have access to it. And then for the other group, the Order of the Illuminati, again in the story, may or may not be, who knows exactly how historical it is. If you use these experiences for spiritual purposes, to quote the person who joined the Illuminati in the story, I have discovered the first matter, the medicine of metals, the elixir of life, the stone of the philosophers, true wisdom and perfect happiness, he said, quoting the alchemical formula, and it's inside my own head. So the idea is that there are multiple ways that you can use this circuit, and that ideally you're going to use it for personal evolution. Then it starts talking a little bit more about the idea of some sort of pleasure dome, which is essentially what Hassan Asaba had in that story. But that you don't really need to physically build one, because you can sort of build it in your own head and access it mentally. And that's pretty much where the chapter ends. Any questions or comments after the recap?
The person that read this book is just, I mean, to perceive all this stuff is just, I don't know. I mean, I'm struggling to wrap my head around a lot of the stuff already, but the fact this book exists is just, to me, mind-blowing, because it's like a high level of perception.
Yeah, I don't think it's fair to put it entirely on Robert Anton Wilson. You'll notice how many people he cites. And this system was sort of co-created by him and Timothy Leary. You'll notice at the beginning of the book, it's dedicated to Timothy Leary, because I think the system the first idea may have come from Leary, and also William S. Burroughs, because a lot of the ideas about brainwashing, or I'm not going to go on a tangent about him, but this book definitely rests on the shoulders of many, many giants. So like a lot of the ideas we've talked about, like he keeps referencing like Gurdjieff and Freud and Jung, and they've all had these different models. And I would suggest that the way he came up with a lot of the stuff for this system, besides his own mystical experiences and those of Timothy Leary, was by reading a lot and trying to combine as much of this information from different practices around the world. So it is impressive that he read so much and he put in the time and effort to think about it and combine it all together. But a lot of this book is mostly a synthesis of things that people around the world have experienced and written about.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why it's worthy of applause, because there's many synthesizers out there, but not many have put together what Ra has put together and had the same influence, you know? I think it's outstanding in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a monumental work. But I just don't want to leave people with the impression that like he came up with all of this himself.
For sure. No. That's true.
All right. Well, I guess let's take a look at the exercises. All right, the first one, and we're on page 194 right now. At the bottom of page 194. You get the lesson book from the local Christian Science reading room and read the lessons for a month. Number 2 says, attend a Sufi weekend seminar. Number 3 says, acquire my book, Sex and Drugs, A Journey Beyond Limits, New Falcon Publications, and try the tantric exercises there described. Number 4 says, learn how to do pranayama properly from an expert. I have tried describing this elsewhere and have found that there is no way to prevent gross errors in verbal transmission of this non-verbal knowledge. Get a Hindu to show you. 5. DeFree John, an American guru, says you can reach illumination by constantly asking, who is the one who is living me now? Well, is it Circuit 1 consciousness, Circuit 2 ego, Circuit 3 mind, Circuit 4 sex rule, Circuit 5 gestalt field, or a higher circuit? Who is it? Where is it? How old is it? 6 says Dr. Aidan Kelly has suggested that the so-called unconscious is more conscious than the so-called conscious mind. That is, the unconscious contains all the feedbacks of the neurosomatic circuit and the other circuits that maintain life. Consider this idea. Is this the one who is living you now? All right, those are the 6 exercises for this chapter. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, it would be cool if we could
Six.
get a pranayama teacher here one day. That's for sure. I'm gonna look into that.
Yeah, I just feel like some of it is like they wouldn't be able to see your physical body though,
That's
but
true.
it would be great to have them explain.
Are there any exercises you think are well suited for maybe taking home for next week, Bob?
Yeah, absolutely. I especially think the fifth and the sixth one are very good to do. They're pretty easy. It's a matter of, especially if you're already good at mindfulness, just try to make it a habit of every once in a while, especially if you've lost conscious awareness of what you're doing. Think about what circuit was I just using. So like if you find yourself like angry while driving or hungry or you're just going on autopilot, if you catch yourself on autopilot, stop for a second and think about it. What circuit was that? And then, in my opinion, that's one of the better ways to like re-imprint yourself in your daily life is to have that mindfulness. And then once you're aware of what circuit you were just using, it's easier to try to maybe use a different circuit if you think that is for the best.
My brother was talking about this the other day when we were in the car, and it was funny because we were talking about, being very loving all the time, and he just said one thing, it made me laugh. That all of that, you can be in that state all the time, but all of that changes whenever someone punches you in the face, and it makes sense because that would send you straight back to maybe a first circuit sort of state or a primal state. You're just like fight or flight. Just, I don't know, I laughed as soon as he said it because we were talking about all this love and stuff, and he just comes out if someone punches you in the face. But yeah, no, I imagine that whatever circuit occupies you changes all the time. We just don't notice it, so that might be worth doing. Just be conscious of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there are some people that are able to use a higher circuit even when they're in physical danger. I think you see some people practicing that in practices that involve pain. And again, I'm clearly not recommending anything, but to use a well-known historical example, there was that Buddhist monk who set himself on fire to protest, was that Vietnam? And
What?
continued to meditate. It's a powerful thing to watch. You don't necessarily need to see it, but there are definitely people who are able to maintain a different circuit even when they're in pain or being struck or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's one thing. I also want to get back to what you said earlier, Bubble, with the navigating the circuit compass again, right? Like, I think, ideally speaking, according to Ra, you would be able to react to the punch in the face appropriately, by jumping to the appropriate circuit and dealing with it in a measured way. And after that, once it's resolved, then getting back to, well, maybe whatever Jake's was talking about, or another state, right? Isn't that also kind of the suggestion? Being able to deal with the things head on in reality, and then also let go of them, maybe move on to the next thing, something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm not a professional psychologist or anything, but in my opinion, many different personality disorders, perhaps, can be characterized as an inability to switch between circuits in an appropriate way, especially if you think about PTSD as like the obvious example. Someone has some sort of trigger thing because something awful has happened to them, and then even when the event is gone and they're not in any real danger, they're unable to leave that circuit. Usually, I would imagine it's the first circuit for the image I have of PTSD. So you definitely, someone who's very skilled at this would be able to very quickly switch between circuits. even when there are conflicting things going on around them. And then, like you said, there is also the matter of knowing when and where and how much and in what way you should use your circuits, because just because you're good at switching between circuits doesn't mean you will do so wisely.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the whole thing with the square and the compass of the Masons, what to do and in which measure to do it. Something like that. It's super simplified, but yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably wraps things up. Are there any last minute questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you for coming to today's session. A recording of it will be up on YouTube in the coming days. Join us again next week, same day and time. You can follow what I do outside VRchat over at my Linktree. That's linktree/elephantwords, linktr.ee/elephantwords. If you haven't already, join the VRM Discord. There's a URL in the lobby. And please consider supporting VRM by donating, supporting on Patreon, or becoming a volunteer. More information at vrmystery.school/support. This is the end of today's session, but feel free to mingle in the lounge.
Awesome. Thanks again, Bubble. Great session. Also,
yeah, it's been good.
Want to thank the stream viewers. There were a couple of them. And let me jump on the stage in Discord real quick too, because there's a couple people listening there as well. Could you jump off the stage there, Bubble?
Sure. Let me...
Yeah, okay, that was awesome. Like even some people who were here, they changed over to the stream when their VR sets disconnected or ran out of battery and so on. So that was a great success. Yeah.
Yeah, Discord's just a lot more convenient, even if there's more to VRchat.
I didn't know, is there a live stream on Discord? So like we could watch this through our phones, for example?
Well, this is the first time we went on YouTube actually and streamed the session, so that would be the way to view it. And on Discord, it's audio only, and we're still figuring that out too, because this time they could only hear Bubble and nobody else.
Well,
Maybe
at least it was me rather than you or something.
Yeah, it was great. But that's just the limitations of how Discord is right now, I guess, or because it might be a bit of a hassle to give everybody speaker rights and click in and out of the game and so on. And well, we'll figure it out as we go. At least this was a great success. We're getting some
interesting
waves.
Thought. I don't know how.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
How you could execute it. What if there were an object you could hold in VRchat, like a microphone, say, that would temporarily give you speaker rights? I have no idea how you do that. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, there would be required some connection between Discord and VRchat, and we're not that far yet, but there is some way that we can start using cameras. I'm currently figuring that out, like world objects from or that output into the streaming software and so on. But yeah, again, still in the laboratory when it comes to those things. It's super interesting though.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, you're getting some more waves and things from the folks on YouTube. So that's pretty awesome.
Oh, well, if they can still see me, thank you.
Yeah, they can. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up now and end the stream. Catch you guys next time. It's kind of late here too, so I'm going to just jump off right away. See you later, folks. It was awesome.
See you.
All right, see ya.